I want to tell you something I have never said out loud to any living person. Not to my children. Not to the pastor who buried both of them. Not to the woman I took up with 10 years after the divorce, who was kind and patient and deserved better than a man who still carried what I was carrying. Not to myself, not really, not in words, because there is a difference between knowing something and saying it, and I have lived my whole life on the safe side of that line. But it is late now. The house is quiet in the way it only gets after midnight, when even the street outside stops pretending to be alive, and I have been sitting here in this chair for a long time with nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the weight of being 81 years old, and I think maybe it is time. So, I will start with the night I found out. Not because that night was the beginning. It was not the beginning. I understand that now. But because that night was the last moment I was a man who did not know what he was capable of. It was a Tuesday in November. I remember that specifically. Tuesday. Not a Friday when a man might be loose from a long week, not a Saturday with its permissions. A Tuesday, which means it was ordinary, which means I had no armor on. I had come home early from the shop. We had a plumbing situation, a pipe that went in the wall under the back bathroom, and the landlord sent a man around 3 in the afternoon who needed the building empty. I called Diane from the payphone on Clement. This was 1987, you understand, before everyone carried a telephone in their pocket like it was a natural part of the body. I called, and there was no answer, and I figured she was out with her sister or at the market, and I drove home. 40 minutes maybe. The drive from the shop was 40 minutes in light traffic, and it was mid-afternoon, so the roads were still clear. I parked on the street because Cecil's car was in the driveway. Cecil is my brother, was my brother. Cecil's car in my driveway on a Tuesday afternoon was not strange. He came around. He had a key, actually. I had given him a key years before when I went to Atlanta for a conference and asked him to check on the house. He never gave it back, and I never asked for it. That is the kind of brothers we were, or the kind I thought we were. I went in through the front door. The house had a sound. I do not know how to explain what I mean by that, except to say that an empty house sounds different from a house with people in it, and a house with people sitting quietly in it sounds different from whatever I walked into. There was something in the air, some frequency, some warmth or tension, or both. The way the air changes in a room where something just happened, or is still happening. I felt it before I understood it. I set my keys on the table by the door. The little ceramic dish Diane had painted in that class she took at the community center, the one with the blue flowers around the rim. I heard something, a small sound, from upstairs. And I want to tell you that I was surprised. I want to tell you I was blindsided, that nothing in my life had prepared me, that I was a fool walking into a wall he never saw. But the truth, and this is the part I have not admitted even inside myself, not fully. The truth is that somewhere below the level of thought, in whatever place the body keeps its knowledge separate from the mind, I think I already knew. Not the specifics, not Cecil. I did not know it was Cecil, but something, some wrong note in the music of my marriage that I had been choosing not to hear for longer than I want to say. I stood at the bottom of the stairs for what felt like a long time. Then I went up. The bedroom door was not all the way closed, just resting against the frame the way it did when you didn't pull it fully shut. I pushed it open, and there they were, my wife, my brother. I will not describe what I saw in detail because some things do not need language, and because even now, even after everything that came after, the image itself is still too specific, too real, too much a thing that happened in my actual life and not in some story I could separate myself from. I will just say, I saw them. I saw it. I understood everything in the space of 1 second. Diane saw me first, the sound she made. And then Cecil turned and saw me, and the sound he made was different, low, half word and half animal. And then there was silence. I stood in the doorway. I did not speak. I did not move. I looked at them, at her face, and then at his face, and then at the room, my room, the room with the blue curtains Diane had sewn herself from fabric she found at a shop on Haight Street, the room with the photograph on the dresser of our wedding day, the room where my children had come to sleep between us when they were small and frightened of thunder. I looked at all of it, and something happened in me that I still do not have a word for. It was not rage. I thought it would be rage. I had seen men in rage. I had felt the edges of it myself in younger years, and this was not that. This was something quieter and much more permanent, like something calcifying, like something that had been soft and living, hardening into stone in real time, right there in the doorway. I turned around. I walked back down the stairs. I picked up my keys from the ceramic dish with the blue flowers. I walked out the front door and got in my car and drove away. And I never told anyone what I had seen. Not once. Not for the rest of that year, not the year after, not the 7 years it took for the marriage to fully die, in the way a marriage dies when the ground has already been poisoned and both people are just pretending not to smell it. I never said the words. Diane waited for me to say them. I know she did. I could see it in her, the bracing, the readiness, the way she watched me come and go in those weeks after, with something that was almost hunger, like she needed the confrontation more than she needed food, needed it to happen so we could either destroy each other or somehow begin again. I gave her nothing. Cecil called the house twice that first week. I answered both times, spoke to him normally, about nothing, about our mother's birthday coming up and whether it was going to rain that weekend. Heard him breathing strange on the other end of the line. Said nothing. Gave him nothing either. That was the beginning of the evil. Not what I did later. This was the first of it. The silence, the decision, conscious or not. And I have asked myself for 40 years which it was, and I still cannot answer. The decision to swallow it whole and keep walking, to take what I knew and compress it into something small and dense and carry it somewhere no one could reach. I was 38 years old. I had 2 children. Marcus was 11. Keisha was 8. I had a plumbing shop with 4 employees and a good name in that part of the city, and a mother who was still alive and proud of both her sons, her firstborn, who was me, and her baby, who was Cecil. Her beautiful boys, she always called us that, her beautiful boys, and I wasn't going to be the one to break that. That is what I told myself. I was protecting her, protecting the children, keeping something intact that did not deserve to be shattered by this. But that was not all of it. There was something else underneath, something I am only willing to look at this late at night at this age, which is this. I wanted to decide. I wanted to be the one who chose what happened next. And choosing silence was the most powerful thing I could do, because it meant I held something over both of them indefinitely, without ever having to show my hand, without ever having to rage or weep or beg. All the things I was terrified of doing, all the things that would have made me visible and breakable. I chose to be invisible instead. I chose to be stone. We lasted 7 more years in that house. 7 years is a long time to share a bed with a woman you have swallowed a secret about. Longer than you might think is possible. But people are surprisingly adaptable when they are motivated by the right fears. And Diane and I were both very frightened, just of different things. She was frightened I would leave. I was frightened of what I would become if I let myself feel it. So we continued. There were dinners, there were holidays, there was Thanksgiving with my mother and Cecil's wife Renata and their kids, and I sat at that table and ate my mother's sweet potato pie and passed the rolls and answered questions about the shop and watched Cecil across the table and felt that stone thing in my chest sit perfectly still and say nothing. Marcus played football in those years. Friday nights under the lights, that boy running like he had somewhere important to be, which I suppose he always did. I went to every game. I stood on the sideline and shouted things fathers shout and felt during those hours, almost like myself. Keisha was taking piano lessons and drawing horses in every notebook she owned. I drove her to her lessons on Saturday mornings and waited in the car and read the paper. And those Saturday mornings are some of the cleanest memories I have. The fog still out over the street, the sound of scales through the window of the teacher's house, coffee in a thermos, my daughter in there, learning something beautiful. I think I was a decent father in those years, distracted in ways I did not show them, but present. There. I was not a decent husband. I had stopped being that in the doorway the moment I turned around. I was performing a husband instead. It looked the same from a distance. Diane knew the difference. She was the closest audience, and she felt it. The performance of it felt me there, without being there. And I think it wore her down in a particular way that was different from what she expected. She had expected confrontation and anger and grief. What she got was a man who came home on time and was polite and asked after her day and was somewhere else entirely. She started pulling away, slowly at first, and then less slowly. Other absences, her sisters more often. A women's Bible study group on Wednesday evenings that I later understood had no Bible study in it. I did not follow her, did not want to know. I was already carrying one unspoken thing. I had no interest in collecting more. And Cecil. Cecil started coming around less. The holidays still, because my mother would have noticed otherwise, would have asked questions Cecil and I were both unequipped to answer. But the casual visits stopped. The phone calls became formal, short, functional. Birthday acknowledgements, nothing more. We stood in my mother's kitchen at Christmas and spoke like men who had been introduced at a business lunch and were trying to be professional about it. Renata noticed something once. She was a perceptive woman, Renata, sharper than Cecil deserved. She pulled me aside at an Easter gathering and said, quiet and direct, "You two have something going on." Not a question. I told her she was imagining things. She looked at me the way women look at men who are lying in ways that everyone can see. And she let it go. Years moved the way years do, when you're in the middle of your life and busy and trying not to look at certain things. Marcus went off to college, Louisiana, studying engineering, which I took a private pride in that I did not talk about much because I did not want him to feel the weight of my hoping. Keisha stayed closer a state school education degree, became a teacher in the same city where she grew up, which I also took a private pride in. The marriage ended officially in 1994, not explosively. Nothing so clean as that. We sat one evening after dinner, and Diane said she thought we should talk about whether we were still doing this, and I said, "What are we doing?" And she said this, gesturing at the room, at the house, at the years of it, and I thought about it for a moment and said, "I do not think we are." And she nodded, and that was close to it. The lawyers were civil. We divided things fairly, or fairly enough. The house sold. She moved to Oakland to be near her sister. I found a place 3 miles from where we'd lived, a flat on a quiet street with a small garden I did not have the energy to tend. I told the children the truth, which is to say, I told them the marriage had run out of something. They were old enough by then. Marcus was 18 and already gone. Keisha was 15 and old in her eyes in a way that hurt me. Keisha asked me if there was someone else, and I said no. That was true. There had been no one else for me. I never told either of them about their mother and Cecil. Not then. Not when they were young. And then time passed, and the opportunity moved on the way opportunities do, and I told myself there was no point now. It would only cause harm. And that became a story I believed. My mother died in 1997. Stroke, 74 years old. She went fast, which people said was a mercy. I drove to the hospital and Cecil was already there, in the waiting room, his face undone, in a way I had not seen since we were boys. We sat in those plastic chairs together for 3 hours, waiting for a doctor to come and tell us the final thing. And I watched my brother cry, quietly, the way men cry when they are trying not to. And I felt something, a loosening, a place inside me that wanted to reach over and put my hand on his arm the way I would have before, the way any brother would. I didn't do it. I sat next to him and did not touch him and stared at the floor. We buried our mother on a Saturday in October and stood at that graveside as the only living members of the family we had been born into. Just the two of us, both of us old enough by then that our faces showed the years. And I thought, standing there in the cold, one of us should say something real. One of us should let the weight down before we drop it instead. I did not say anything real. We went back to his house after the burial, sat with Renata and the kids and some neighbors who had come to pay respects, and I ate food I don't remember and spoke words I don't remember and drove home alone. Now here is the thing. Here is what I have been circling around without saying. The way I have been circling it for decades. In 1999, Cecil was diagnosed with kidney failure. Both kidneys, progressive, degenerative, a condition he had apparently been managing quietly for some time before it became unmanageable. By the time I was told, by Renata who called me, because Cecil would not, he was already on dialysis 3 times a week and deteriorating faster than the numbers suggested he should be. He needed a transplant. Renata told me this the same way she told me everything, straight and without softening it. She said the doctors had run the family. She said his children were not matches. She said there were people on the list, but the list was long, and his condition was worsening faster than the list was moving. She said they had tested me while I was at the hospital for something unrelated, a routine blood draw, my annual physical, and that the results were there in the records. She said I was a match. I sat with that for a long moment on the phone. I remember the kitchen where I was standing, the light through the window, the garden outside, that I still had not managed to tend. I said, "Let me think about it." She said, "Of course, take whatever time you need." I said I would call her back. I did not call her back. Cecil called me himself 2 weeks later. His voice on the phone sounded like something being operated from far away, tired in a deep and total way that had nothing to do with sleep. He said he understood it was a lot to ask. He said he would understand if I said no. He said he was not going to pressure me. And then he said, and this is the sentence I have heard every night for 25 years. He said, "I know things between us have not been right for a long time, and I know that is my fault, Terence. I know what I did, and I would not ask you this, except I am afraid." He said he was afraid, and I said, "Listen to me. I need you to understand that I said this calmly, without cruelty in my voice, without heat of any kind. I said, I appreciate you calling, Cecil. I need more time." He said, "Of course." I hung up the phone. And I did not give him the kidney. I told the hospital I had reconsidered on medical grounds, that I had a heart irregularity my own doctor had flagged, and that I had been advised against major surgery. This was a partial truth. I did have a mild arrhythmia that my cardiologist had documented. It was not severe. It would not have precluded a transplant surgery, not according to the literature, not according to the specialist I had quietly consulted, but it was enough language. It was enough paper. I filed the paperwork, and it was accepted, and that door was closed with the right words in the right forms, and no one on the outside could see what was inside it. Cecil stayed on the list. He did not find another match in time. He died in 2001, 50 years old. 50 years old, which is young, which I know is young, which I knew was young when I was sitting in the pew at his funeral, watching Renata hold herself together and watching his children, grown by then but broken in the way adult children break at a parent's death, the sudden reminder that they are not as protected as they imagined. I sat in the fourth pew, and I wore my dark suit, and I shook hands afterward, and I said the things people say. And I drove home, and I sat in the kitchen with a glass of water, and I did not feel what I expected to feel. I expected relief. I had been braced for relief, had been prepared to feel ashamed of the relief. What I felt instead was something I still do not have the right word for. Not guilt, not then. That came later, in waves, in the ordinary way guilt arrives, 3 in the morning, the years moving, the face appearing in a certain kinds of light. Not guilt at that moment. It was more like completion, like something that had started in that doorway in 1987 had finally reached its end, like the stone I had been carrying had been set down. And then I picked it back up again. Because that is the thing about what you carry. The putting down does not mean it is gone. You set it down, and you look at it, and you understand what it has made of you, and then you pick it back up because there is no one else to carry it and nowhere to leave it. Marcus has my jawline, always has. When he was about 12 or 13, and the baby roundness was going from his face, I used to look at him and see myself at that age in a way that was something like wonder, like seeing proof of your own existence in another person, which is one of the few truly strange experiences a human being gets to have. He's in his 40s now, has a son of his own, my grandson Darius, who is 12 and plays basketball and moves through a room like he owns it, which I find both amusing and correct. Marcus calls me on Sundays, not every Sunday, but most. He calls and we talk about football and about his work and about Darius, and about nothing, the easy nothing of a conversation between two people who are comfortable with each other. And I am grateful for those calls in a way I never thought to tell him. I have never told Marcus what I know about his mother and his uncle. There have been moments over the years when I could feel the weight of it near the surface. Holidays, Marcus talking about Cecil once with a fondness that I found not painful, exactly, sad. He said something once about how it was a shame Cecil went so young, said something about how Uncle Cecil always had time for him when he was a kid, how Cecil would take him to games, throw a ball with him in the backyard. He said this with genuine warmth, and I sat across from him, and I nodded. And I smiled, and I said, yes, he did love you kids, and I meant it. Even then I meant it, because whatever Cecil was to me, whatever he did to the thing between us, he was good to my children. I have never been able to use that against him in my heart, even when I wanted to. The children are separate. I kept them separate. I made myself. Keisha is more complicated. Keisha has always been able to see around corners where I am concerned. She was 8 when the thing happened, and she could not have known anything. But she grew up in the atmosphere of that marriage after, in the particular weather of 2 people performing normality. And I think it shaped her in ways I still feel responsible for. She is careful with people, slow to open, watches exits. Her marriages, 2 of them, neither long, ended in ways that felt to me like a woman who was waiting to be disappointed and who was never entirely surprised when she was. I have wondered for years whether she inherited that from me, the waiting for the other shoe, the readiness for abandonment, or whether the house she grew up in simply taught it to her. Probably both. Probably my own damage and the damage I allowed to continue. She lives nearby now, 40-something, still teaching, a small house with a garden that looks better than mine ever did. She comes on Sunday afternoons sometimes, and we sit, and I feed her whatever I have cooked, and she tells me about her students, and I listen, and it is, most of the time, the best part of my week. She asked me once, years ago, maybe 2010 or so, she asked me why I thought Uncle Cecil and I had drifted. She said she had noticed it even as a kid, the change in how we were together, how it went from easy to formal. She asked me gently, careful with me the way she is, not pressing, but genuinely wondering. I told her people drift. I told her life gets complicated and men especially are bad at maintaining what they should maintain. She looked at me for a moment, that look she has, the one that is waiting for the real thing. And then she let it go. I have imagined telling her so many times. I have sat in this chair on nights like this one and rehearsed the conversation in my head, the words, her face, what she would say, whether she would be angry or sad or relieved to finally have an explanation for the thing she always felt without naming. I do not know which it would be. I have never known. I have not told her. There is something I want to say about Diane. She is still alive. 78 in Oakland, in the same house near her sister. I know this not because we speak. We do not really. A phone call at Christmas for the sake of the children, brief and polite, but because Keisha keeps me informed, updates offered without drama, a small passing of information, the way families do when they are trying to hold something together. Do not know how to feel about Diane after all of this time. There are nights when I feel nothing for her except a distant familiarity, the way you feel about a place you lived in once that someone else lives in now. there are other nights when I feel the thing I felt when I first met her, which was a kind of astonishment that a person could be that precisely beautiful, not just in the physical way, though she was that, but in the way she moved through the world, the directness of her, the quickness of her mind, the way she laughed at things that were actually funny and refused to pretend otherwise about things that weren't. I fell in love with Diane, genuinely and fully, and I do not think that went away even in the years after the doorway. I think I carried the love and the stone together for a long time, which is one of the more exhausting things a person can do. What she did, I am not going to call it a small thing, because it was not a small thing, and I have no interest at this age in pretending. She betrayed me. She and Cecil together made a choice to do something that unmade a part of me I never fully remade. That is true, and also true. I do not know what the marriage was for her in those years. I know what it was for me, a thing I worked at, a thing I took seriously, a thing I would have said, if asked, that I loved. But I was not home in ways I did not recognize at the time. I was in the shop long hours. I was in my own head. I was not cruel, not absent in any visible way, but there is a kind of presence that is really just occupation of space, and I think that is what I gave her in too many of those years. I was there without being there. She felt alone. I know she did, because she told me once, early in the marriage, before any of this, she told me she sometimes felt like she was talking to someone through glass. I did not understand what she meant then. I think I understand now. None of that excuses it. I want to be clear that I am not excusing it. But I am old enough now to look at the whole picture instead of the part that hurt me most, and the whole picture is more complicated than I allowed it to be. And Cecil, my brother, there are nights when I miss him. That is the most honest thing I can tell you, and also the most difficult, because it sits directly next to what I did and what he did, and makes no logical sense if you think about people as simple things, which they are not. I miss the Cecil from before, the one I grew up with, the one who used to steal my clothes when we were teenagers and deny it badly and make me laugh despite myself, the one who came to the hospital when Marcus was born and stood in that corridor with his hands in his pockets, looking simultaneously proud and terrified, like he was the one who'd had the baby, the one who called me the night before my wedding and talked for 2 hours about nothing because I was nervous, and he knew it, and neither of us ever said the word nervous. That's Cecil I miss, the other one, the one in my bedroom that Tuesday afternoon. I do not know who that was. I never asked. That is another thing I chose not to do. I never asked him how long, how it started, what it was for him. I decided not to know. I sealed the room with them both inside it and walked away, and never reopened the door. And then I watched him die, which was the sealed room and the walking away taken to their absolute conclusion. I have never said that so plainly before. I watched him die. Not physically. I was not in the room. There was no room to be in. It was a medical reality, a failing organ, a list that moved too slowly. But I was a match, and I knew I was a match, and I chose not to be. And he died. Those sentences belong together in the same breath, and I have spent 25 years putting them in separate rooms the way I put everything in separate rooms. And I am tired of doing that. I am 81 years old, and I am tired. The thing about evil, the real kind, not the dramatic movie kind, but the kind that lives in ordinary men in ordinary houses, is that it is almost never loud. It does not announce itself. It arrives in a moment of stillness, in a decision that does not feel like a decision, in the closing of a door, in a form filed with language that is technically true, in a silence that outlasts everything around it. I thought I was protecting myself. Maybe I was. I do not know anymore what the difference is between protection and punishment, between grief and retribution. They felt the same in my hands. They still do. I have thought sometimes about what Cecil said on that phone call, about being afraid. He said he was afraid. I think about the specific thing that means when a man in his late 40s who is sick is on the phone asking his older brother for help, the way the pride has to step aside to let the fear speak, the way that must have cost him, knowing what he had done, asking anyway. He was not a weak man, Cecil. He was stubborn, the way men from families like ours are stubborn, the way a certain kind of survival makes you, the unwillingness to show need, to show softness, to give anyone the angle to use against you. He called me anyway, and I said I needed more time. I think about his face on that call, though I could not see it. I think about Renata sitting nearby, probably, or in the next room, waiting to hear what I had said. I think about him having to tell her he needs more time, what her face was, what she said or didn't say. I think about the fact that he apologized on that call, that he said he knew it was his fault, that he acknowledged it, offered it up without my asking, without my threatening, without any pressure, just put it on the table between us because he was afraid and because he was trying to reach me. I did not let myself be reached. That is the part that lives in me the most, the deepest, the part that is still working on me even now, at this late hour, in this quiet room. Not the thing he did, which was real and damaging and not forgiven, not even now. Not the thing I did, which I have named tonight for the first time, but the reach. He reached and I closed my hand, and then he died. And Renata went on, their kids went on, the world went on without Cecil in it, which the world does, which the world has no trouble doing, because the world does not remember anyone for very long. I went on too. There was a woman named Gloria, 2004, a few years after Cecil died. She was a friend of a friend, a retired school teacher, twice widowed, from New Orleans originally. One of those women who have seen enough of life that they no longer waste time with pretending. She was warm in a way that was not soft, warm and direct and honest, the kind of honesty that is not a weapon but a gift, which is a rare kind. We spent about a year in something I did not know what to call. She called it a friendship with feelings, which I thought was more accurate than what most people called these things. We had dinners. We went to a concert once, a jazz thing, that she loved and that I pretended to love more than I did, and she saw through it immediately and laughed at me, and I laughed at myself, and it was one of the better evenings I can remember from those years. She asked me once, sitting in her living room, sitting across from me, in the particular quiet of two older people who have nothing to prove to each other. She asked me what I was carrying. Just like that. Not where it came from, or what it was. Just, what are you carrying? I looked at her for a long time. She did not look away. I said, something I am not ready to put down. She said, okay. She did not push, did not circle back later, just filed it away somewhere, and went on caring for me the way she did, practically and warmly and without demand. I did not tell her. I should have told her. I know that. Gloria was the person to tell it to. The right kind of soul, the right kind of listening, the kind that receives without judging or fixing or turning it into something about her. I should have told her, and I did not. And she moved back to New Orleans in 2006 to be near family, and we traded letters, actual letters, for a while, and then we didn't. And I have thought about her over the years with a particular kind of regret that is softer than the others, but still there. She deserved the whole truth of me. I gave her the edited version, which is the same as a lie, not in the words, but in the shape of it. All omissions are lies of a kind. I know that. I have lived inside that particular knowledge for too long to pretend otherwise. I'm thinking about my mother now. She would have been horrified by what I did, not what I found out, not what Diane and Cecil did. She would have been heartbroken by that, but she was a woman who understood human failure because she had lived enough of it herself. She would have been horrified by the kidney, by what I did with my silence and my medical forms and my careful technical refusal. She would have said, "Terence, that is not who I raised." She would have been right. And also, I think she would have understood it in the way that only a mother understands the full arc of a person, the way she knew both of us, knew what we were made of and what we were capable of. And I think she would have sat with me and cried a little and not absolved me, but stayed there anyway. That is the kind of woman she was. I have wanted her for 40 years, not in the way you want something back. I am not naive about death, but in the way you want witness, someone who knew you before the decisions, who can hold the before and after together without letting either erase the other. My children love me, but they did not know me at 35. They did not know me before. Gloria could have known me if I had let her, but I did not let her. I have been so careful about who I let know me. And in the careful years I have grown old, and now there is almost no one left who remembers my mother's kitchen and the way she said our names or the way the house smelled in January when she was cooking all day. And that specificity of being known is not something you replace. It just empties out. The people who held the early version of you leave one by one, and eventually you are the only one left holding it, and there is no one to confirm the memory, no one to say, yes, that is how it was, yes, that boy existed, yes, this is the man he became. Marcus is coming next month, a week, maybe 10 days. He is bringing Darius, and I am already thinking about what I will cook and what we will do, and I have an anticipatory pleasure about it that is one of the cleaner feelings I get now. Darius is 12, and loud and interested in everything, and exhausting in a way that I love. I watch him, and I think about Marcus at 12, running routes on that football field, and I think about myself at 12, which was a different world in a different America, that this boy will never fully understand, despite my best attempts to explain it. I want to tell Marcus the truth before I die. I have been wanting to do that for a long time now. Not for absolution. I am past the age of expecting absolution. It is too late for that. And anyway, it is not something another person can give you. Not really, no matter what the preachers say. But for honesty, for the shape of the story to be complete, at least in one other living person. But I keep thinking, what does Marcus do with it? His mother is alive in Oakland, 78, still herself. His uncle Cecil is 20-something years in the ground. What does knowing change? It changes the story of his childhood, of the family he thought he came from. And is that my right to do to him now, in his 40s, when he has his own son and his own life and his own story that is built on top of this one? And then I think, he deserves the truth. He is a grown man, and he deserves to know what happened in the house he grew up in, and why his father was the way he was, and why his uncle and his father were strange with each other in those last years, and why when Cecil was dying, I was not at that hospital more than twice. He has asked over the years, in small ways. He has never pushed, never pressed, but he has left the door open. He is a perceptive man. He became perceptive the way children of unhappy marriages become perceptive, through the particular schooling of learning to read rooms. I do not know if I will tell him. I want to. I'm afraid of what changes once I do. That fear has governed a long time. Outside the window right now, there is nothing. A street, a light at the corner that has been flickering for 3 weeks that I keep meaning to call about. A tree I planted 10 years ago that has gotten bigger than I expected, which is one of the small, reliable pleasures of 10 years. The evidence that something grew. I am 81 years old. I have been sitting in this chair for most of this night. My hips hurt. They hurt most nights now. The body's way of noting that time has passed, which I appreciate in a perverse way. The body is always honest, always tells you exactly where you are, unlike the mind, which will protect you from the truth for as long as you let it. I have been thinking tonight about the word evil, whether it applies to me, whether it applies to what I did. I think of evil as a thing you choose with knowledge, with knowing. I knew what I was doing with the kidney. I knew what I was doing with the forms. I was not confused or impulsive or broken at that moment. I was very clear, very calm, very deliberate, and I made a choice that I understood the consequences of. That is about as close to chosen evil as I think ordinary people get. But I also know what was underneath it. The 10 years of silence, the marriage going dark, the watching my brother sit at my mother's table, the love that turned into that stone thing. None of that excuses it. I am not trying to excuse it. But context is not the same as excuse, and I want to tell the whole story for once, not just the damning part, and not just the victim part, the whole thing, even if the whole thing still comes out to, I let my brother die when I could have helped him, because I did. I did that, and he was my brother, whom I loved, and who failed me, and who was afraid, and who died at 50 years old because his kidneys failed, and I was a match, and I filed a paper, and he went on the list, and the list was long. Both things are true. All of it is true. That is the thing they do not tell you about the truth. It does not clean itself up into one story. It sits in several stories at the same time, and you have to hold all of them, and they are heavy, and they do not resolve. Diane called me 2 years ago. Actually called, not the Christmas duty call, a real call, in April, middle of the afternoon. Her voice on the phone was different, older, careful, a little afraid. She said she had been thinking about things, and she wanted to say something to me. I said, all right. She said she was sorry. For what happened, for what she did with Cecil, and for what it did to me, and to the marriage, and to whatever I became after. She said she had been carrying it for 35 years, and she was too old now to keep carrying it. I was quiet for a moment. I said, I know you are. She said, I wish I could undo it. I said, I know that too. There was a silence between us, not an empty silence, a full one. She said, "Were you angry for a long time?" And I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the stone thing in my chest and the forms I filed and the dialysis running 3 times a week and Cecil on the phone saying he was afraid. I said, "I handled it badly." She said, "Terence, that is not what I asked." And I said, "Yes, I was angry for a long time." She said, "I'm glad you said that." I said, "Me too." We were on the phone for maybe another 10 minutes, talking about the children and her health and nothing much. Before she hung up, she said, "You were a good father, Terence. Whatever else happened, you were a good father." I thanked her. I meant it. I did not tell her about the kidney. I have thought about whether she knows. Renata would know or suspect. Renata was too sharp not to wonder. Whether Renata ever told Diane, I do not know. Whether Diane has been carrying a suspicion about it all these years alongside her own guilt, I cannot say. I did not ask. I did not tell. Some rooms stay closed. I keep coming back to the doorway. The ceramic dish with the blue flowers, the sound from upstairs. I have stood in that doorway so many times in memory, standing there again and again, the way a tongue finds a sore tooth, the way the mind returns to the unresolved. And every time I stand there, I'm looking not at what I saw in the room, but at what I was in the moment before I turned around. That man who stood there for a long, still moment and made a decision without knowing he was making one. He was not ready. He was not equipped. He was 38, and he had built a life from careful work, and he was not built for that level of betrayal. Not in his own bed, not with his own blood. No one is built for that. The equipment for it does not exist. You either collapse or you harden, and I hardened, and the hardening became the rest of my life. I do not forgive myself. I want to say that clearly, because I think there is a version of this kind of confession that ends in a man granting himself peace, saying he has come to terms with what he did, saying the journey has led him to acceptance, or understanding, or release. I am not going to do that, because it wouldn't be true. I am 81 years old, and I'm sitting in this chair at 2 in the morning, and I am not at peace. I carry it the same way I have always carried it, only now I am tired from the carrying, and that tiredness is what has made me willing to say it out loud for the first time. Not peace, just exhaustion, just an old man, late at night, finally out of the energy it takes to keep something hidden. Cecil died at 50. I am 81. I have had 31 extra years that he did not have. 31 years of Sunday calls from Marcus and piano scales in a car on Saturday mornings, and a grandson who moves through rooms like he owns them, and a flickering streetlight I keep meaning to call about, and a tree that got bigger than I expected. I have had all of that. He had nothing past 50. And I was the match, and I knew it, and I filed the forms, and I was very calm. I want Marcus to know someday. I think he deserves to know the father I actually was, the whole of it, the good Sundays, and the plumbing shop, and the football games on the sideline, and also this room late at night, this choice I made, this weight that does not put itself down. Whether I tell him or whether I put it in something he finds after, I have not decided. Some things feel true to say in a voice, and some things are only sayable in writing, and I do not know which this is. I do not know very much anymore. The tree out the window is growing. The light at the corner is still flickering. The refrigerator hums in the kitchen, the way it has hummed every night for the 20 years I have lived in this house. My brother's name was Cecil. I loved him. I let him die. I'm telling you this because it is late, and I am tired, and I cannot carry it as heavily as I used to, and because somewhere inside me, underneath all of this stone, there is still something that believes being honest about what you did is the last decent act available to you. Not forgiveness, not resolution, just the truth, said out loud, once to the quiet room. Just that. I think that is all I have left tonight.